other questions? Yes, sir.
I'm Adam Sampson. I graduated from Bard in May, actually.
Congratulations. What was your degree in?
Economics.
Very good.
And it's kind of an economic-related question. In the short run, how do we deal with the fact that Russia and OPEC control so much of the world's oil? We see oil prices are nearing $80 a barrel again, even while the world economy is contracting.
Have you read Tom Friedman's last two books? The World is Flat was his second to last book. His last book was Hot, Flat, and Crowded, which is about climate change and globalization. I agree with Tom Friedman. Tom says, isn't it time that we reduced our dependence on oil? Isn't it time that we try to stimulate green technologies, renewable technologies, diversify our energy base? I would even say build nuclear power plants, which are clean. It's difficult for a lot of people, but if you're interested in combating climate change, nuclear power is one of the ways to do it. And I just think, to continue to pay these high prices, which is expensive for people, for home heating oil, and even for natural gas, so much money flows out of this country when it goes to buy foreign oil, when we could be building a green future that has the benefit of energy produced in our own country, wind, solar, biomass, biofuels, right? Energy that's cleaner to combat climate change, and energy that's not going to be as expensive. I just think this is so important for us to do. The stimulus package, put a lot of money into technology, in investment capital, into our renewables. I think it's a great investment for the future of our country. But it's not going to happen overnight. Our appetite for foreign oil is so huge. We consume so much energy in this country. We're talking about probably a generational transformation. When I was your age, in the 1970s, when I was a college student, Jimmy Carter launched all these very intelligent energy reduction programs, and as soon as he left the White House, we forgot about him. We went back to our addiction to foreign oil, and now 30 years later, we finally go back to some of these same ideas that Jimmy Carter had, like turn the thermostats down. We don't need to have 74 degrees in this building. We should be at 66. Really. Drive cars that have high miles per gallon. Drive hybrids. Don't drive as much. Ride bikes more. Invest in trains. Invest in public transit. Reduce our dependence on foreign oil. It's an economic, environmental, and moral issue, I think. Great question. You can lead this revolution with your economics degree from Bard. It's important. Yes, we'll start back here and work our way to the front. Yes.
This is sort of a related question. You mentioned that you thought that Russian power was kind of on the decline, especially in this era. And I was just wondering what you thought about maybe not so much how their oil affects the United States, but their monopoly on natural gas affects the region, like the countries in the region. Do you think that that is still kind of giving them a little bit of an edge over? I mean, I think that their power is pretty substantial just because of that fact.
No, you're right. That's a very good point. I didn't mean to suggest that Russia is not powerful in the world, but I think it's a declining power. But gradually, because they've got oil and gas, they're one of the major producers in the world, they have power. And what's happened in the last 30 or 40 years is that when the Cold War began to break down, the Cold War divisions, the Europeans and the Russians built gas pipelines, gas coming from Russia into Western Europe, so that Europe is now largely dependent on Russian energy to power Germany and the Netherlands and Italy, Spain, France. And so the Russians have that power. The Russians use that, not against the West Europeans, but against the East Europeans. I think the last 3 New Years, the Russians have had some kind of energy crisis where they've turned the gas off to Ukraine. Because, the Russians battle the Ukrainians. They don't like the fact that Ukraine's independent. So they use that power to show the Ukrainians, you depend on us. We're the top dog in this neighborhood. They've done it with Georgia. They've done it with the Baltic countries that were, forcibly incorporated in the Soviet Union in 1940 and freed 50 years later. So the Russians are not averse to using that power, I think, in a fairly harsh and brutal way. That means they still are powerful. I didn't mean to suggest otherwise. But in the great cosmic scheme of things, this is a country, the Soviet Union, was extraordinarily powerful, say from the late 1940s to the mid-80s. And they are not there any longer. Our power is far greater. And I feel good about that as an American, because I think that we are largely a virtuous country compared to the way that the Russian leadership has. Yes? Yes, sir.
I was wondering if you could comment a little bit more on Israel, perhaps elaborate a little bit, and what you thought the current administration could do, perhaps to modulate their policy versus Israel, especially considering the recent Goldstone report that said in no uncertain terms that Israel committed repeatedly war crimes during the recent war in Gaza.
The Gaza war.
How
Have you read that
respond
report?
to that?
That report just came out a couple of weeks ago, the European Union report. It actually says that both sides committed war crimes, the Palestinians too, but it lays the harsher blame on Israel. And Israelis, of course, are deeply unhappy about that and have argued against that report. I think that, again, I think that President Obama's instinct, which has been to be centrally involved in the Middle East peace negotiations, to appoint George Mitchell, who is one of the top negotiators and diplomats in America, very experienced guy. He negotiated the Good Friday Agreement that helped to bring peace to Northern Ireland during the Clinton administration. He was former majority leader of the Senate, very talented person. He's our negotiator. That's a great appointment. And President Obama is investing a lot of his capital in trying to convince the Israelis to end the settlements, but also trying to convince the Palestinians to come to the table. I think that's the right instinct. He's going to need a lot of help and luck in getting to an agreement. I'm fairly pessimistic in the short term, unfortunately, that we'll see an Israeli-Palestinian agreement. The Israelis are worried that there really isn't a Palestinian partner that can make an agreement that would stick, because Hamas and Fatah, of course, are divided. Hamas runs Gaza, Fatah runs the West Bank, and they don't see eye to eye. And I also think there are some people in Israel who probably don't want to have a quick peace agreement, or are not willing to establish a peace agreement with the Palestinians. And so in the short term, I'm pessimistic, but in the long term, I think the handwriting's on the wall. There must be a Palestinian state. I think it's inevitable there has to be a Palestinian state. I agree with Claire, and I may call you, use your first name. And, I think that Israel has a danger. If it continues the occupation of the West Bank, at some point it threatens the democratic nature of the State of Israel and the Jewish nature of the State of Israel. And I'm a strong supporter of the State of Israel. I want Israel to survive and succeed, and for that reason, believe there must be a peace agreement between Israel and the Palestinians in the future. Great questions. Difficult. It's ironic that President Obama's popularity rating in Israel is now in single digits, because he's been very tough with the Israelis. That's ironic, because that's unusual for an American president. It means that he's really joining the issues, and he's doing some things to pinpoint the problem of the settlements. I think he's been right to focus on that.